guys, welcome back to Nadir Audio. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a pair of Klipsch RP-600M IIs. So I've been wanting to get a pair of RP-600s since the Mark 1s came out way back in 2019 or so, but it wasn't until late last year, 2023, that they went on sale for a while that I decided it was finally time to get some and try them out in my system. So today we're going to be taking a look at them using my solid state setup, but then we're also going to be taking a look at them with the tube amp. So let's get started. So I've been interested in Klipsch speakers ever since I first heard a vintage pair back in the early 2000s, but I didn't actually own a pair until I bought my RB51 Reference 2s in 2013, and I really liked them. I used them for a few years with a vintage Sherwood receiver, and I really liked how alive they sounded, and they sounded better than the vintage speakers I had been using previously. But there were two things that I wasn't crazy about. One of which is that they just are a very small speaker, so they don't have a very large sound. And also, when people talk a little bit about horn speakers sometimes being a little shouty, I definitely could understand what they're talking about, and I felt that a little bit with those. So I did move on to some ELAC speakers and eventually my KEF LS50s, and I did prefer those. But I always wanted to get back to the Klipsch at some point because there was something about the sound that I did really like. And so when these RP-600Ms first became popular back in 2019 or so, I did really want a pair, but you know, they were fairly expensive, relatively inexpensive really. But I had other things I wanted to add to my list and take a look at. So I held off for a long time, always thinking, well, I'll pick up a pair at some point. And then when they went on sale, they started to go on sale for pretty reduced prices back in 2023. So in late 2023, I was actually able to purchase a pair for, I think I paid $420 for the pair, which is actually a great deal. And since then, they've gone on and off sale. I think right now you can actually get them for just under $500 a pair, which I think is a very good deal for these speakers. But I did want to talk just a little bit about the RB51s again. So these speakers are quite a bit bigger, and if I just hold it up here, you can see how much larger these are than the 51s. And that really does make a big difference. These sound like a much larger, like a large bookshelf speaker, which makes a big difference. And also, I had previously done a video where I took a look at the RB51s with my tube amp. And ultimately, while I thought there was some synergy there, I felt, again, that they were a little bit too small. And the bigger issue was that I just didn't feel they were very refined, especially compared to the LS50s. So with this speaker, I do feel that it is much more refined, and so I'm not surprised that many other audiophiles and reviewers have been really liking these since 2019 or so. But let's talk a little bit about how I found these to perform in my solid state system. So the solid state part of my system is currently the Saga preamp and a Vidar 1 power amp. And for all the listening I did in this video, as far as sources, I was listening to CDs and also files. So the CDs were all played through my Rotel CD11 Tribute CD player. And then for the files, I was basically streaming to an Apple TV that's running via HDMI into my Samsung TV, and then from the TV into my Chord Mojo 2 DAC amp. So this is an external DAC amp that can be used just as a standalone DAC as well, and it actually sounds really good. So we'll be reviewing this in a future video. But for this video, this is what I use for listening to files. So all of the speaker comparisons in this video were between the Klipsch and my KEF LS50s. And the first thing you notice when you switch over to the RP-600M IIs is that they are not as precise in terms of imaging. They still image well, you know where all the instruments are on the soundstage, but they're not like laser focused like the LS50s are in terms of that. And also the soundstage, well, you get a nice soundstage with the Klipsch as well. It's not as wide as with the LS50s, and it's also not quite as deep. In terms of height though, they're both pretty good, about full size height. So another big difference you notice is that the Klipsch speakers are quite a bit more dynamically alive, and so you get a little bit more of that jump factor with a lot of recordings, which I like, and a little bit more intensity. But another difference, something I wasn't quite expecting, is that the Klipsch can often give you a little bit more what I would call density in the sound, so the instruments or the singer feel a little bit more corporeal, so it feels a little bit more like there's some weight there and that there's like a real person or instrument rather than just sort of a representation of one. So that's something I really liked about the Klipsch. So let's talk a little bit about some of the recordings that I listened to with this setup. So one of the CDs I listened to was Jacko Pastorius's solo album from 1976. So if you never listened to this, I would definitely highly recommend it. It has a lot of really good songs on it, most of which were written by Jacko himself, and a lot of really great players. And the recording itself, this is actually a remaster from around 2000 or so. So unlike a lot of remasters that were done around that time, this one doesn't have a ton of extra compression, so it still sounds pretty good. But one of the things that I was surprised about with the RP600s is them adding a bit more of that density, where it just feels a lot more like there are real instrumentalists, real players in front of you. Whereas it sounds great with the LS50s in the solid state system, but it's just not quite as enjoyable because it just doesn't feel quite as real. And so that was something that I really liked and was something that was pretty noticeable with this recording. So another CD I listened to was Let's Dance by David Bowie. Now this is the 2018 remaster, and unlike the Jacko remaster, this one actually does have quite a bit of compression on it. It's still a pretty good sounding recording, but it has more compression than I would typically like, which can sometimes lead to listener fatigue. So I was curious to see how this one would play out with the two speakers. And surprisingly, on this one I actually preferred the LS50s. I think that wider soundstage, a little bit more specificity on the placements of instruments in the soundstage, and also just a little bit of clarity on some of the sounds, especially the additional instruments, I appreciated. And unlike the Jacko recording, which was benefiting from a little bit of air that the RP600s were adding, on this one you really didn't notice that much of a difference. So while they were pretty close, on this one I'd say my preference was the LS50. So I also did listen to quite a few audiophile recordings, including this one, the HiFi Collective, which is kind of a jazzy electronic piece that's on David Chesky's new label. And on this, I really didn't have a clear preference between the LS50s and the RP600Ms. I feel like I really enjoyed a little bit of extra resolving power on the LS50s for some of those micro details was really nice. I also like the wider soundstage. I mean, the soundstage on these recordings is really pretty incredible. But I did also like some of that additional density that I was getting from the RP600Ms, and also that sort of air that it's like the illusion of air around the instruments I really liked. And so there wasn't really a clear winner. I really like listening to this one on both of the speakers, so that would really kind of come down to your personal preferences. But overall, that's pretty much my takeaway, is that I really like both of these speakers in the solid state setup. And it really comes down to a recording by recording basis. I might have a slight preference one way or the other, or I might not even have a preference. It depends on the mood that I'm in. But I'd say that either one of these speakers would be a great pairing if you do have a Saga preamp and a Vidar power amp. But let's move on and talk a little bit about what I listened to in my tube setup. So on the tube side, we're using my Reisong A10 EL34 based single-ended integrated amplifier. So I've made a couple videos about this in the past, and I'll include links to those in the description below. But I've never really found a perfect speaker for this amplifier. I've tried out a few in the past, and the LS50s have been pretty good, actually better than you might expect given that they're low sensitivity speakers. They get plenty loud enough in terms of volume. And I do like this amp with the LS50s better than I liked the PS Audio Sprout, which is what we started the channel with. I think they do have better synergy, but they're not perfect. So I was really interested to bring in the Klipsch RP-600Ms and try those out and see if they would be a better match. And so all of the differences that I talked about with the solid state setup still apply here, but there's also something that's a little bit different than the density I was talking about before, and that's that with the LS50s, there's something about everything that you listen to with this amp, even though it's very clear and even though there's plenty of bass and treble. If anything, this tube amp is a little bit of a V-curve amp. and things, can get pretty loud. The bass is not as controlled on this as it is on the solid state, obviously, but it's actually pretty good for a slightly loose sounding bass. It's a fairly natural sounding bass. But what it really comes down to is that everything has this slightly ethereal sound to it. And this is especially noticeable when you're listening to heavier music like classic rock or heavier electronic music. And so that was something that I was hoping that these would address. And they seem to have done that quite a bit. So that ethereal sound completely goes away, and you get something that has a lot of weight to the sound. It feels a little bit more like people are really present, even though you're losing just a little bit of that micro details and really resolving recordings. I do feel like they have better synergy with this amplifier. So let's talk a little bit about some of the recordings that I listened to. So one recording I listened to was Blues for Tony. So this is Alan Holdsworth, Alan Pasqua, Jimmy Haslip, and Chad Wackerman playing live at Yoshi's, a really good sounding jazz club that I used to go to in the late 90s and early 2000s. Saw a lot of jazz shows there. This was recorded in the mid 2000s. I did not see this show live. I wish I had. It's actually a really good performance as well. And this is a tribute to Tony Williams, the drummer. So Alan Holdsworth and Alan Pasqua both played in his band The Lifetime in the 70s. I also have their first and second albums, and so they play some of the songs from that on here, as well as some other stuff. Now this is a recording that sometimes can cause a little bit of listening fatigue for me. It's actually a pretty good recording, recorded at a good sounding club, but I think what it is that they're playing very fast guitar and keyboards, and it's almost like a rock recording, and I think that can sometimes lead to listener fatigue on certain systems. So I like to listen to it on the tube amp, and I think that eliminates a lot of it. But again, with the LS50s, I feel like it never sounded as muscular as I wanted it to. Again, it had a little bit of that ethereal feel, which I didn't like. So that was really great with the RP-600Ms. It sounded really good. It sounded muscular. You still get all of the live feeling, and you get a little bit of that air too between instruments, which sounds really great. So this is definitely, this combination with the Reisong A10 and the Klipsch speakers is the best that I've heard this particular recording. So that was really exciting, and that kind of led me to listening to a few other things. Another album I listened to was Every Man and Woman is a Star by Ultramarine. So this was originally recorded in the early 90s, and I've had it since the early 2000s when it was re-released. I bought it on a recommendation from some friends who listen to a lot of electronic music, and I always really liked it, but I'd sort of forgotten about it, and I saw it mentioned on another audiophile channel fairly recently. I think it was 13th Note Hi-Fi. But I was like, wow, yeah, I should pull that out and listen to it again. And yeah, it's a really interesting and great electronic recording with a lot of really cool sampled sounds and voices. And I really enjoyed listening to it. And yeah, it sounded great with the A10 and the RP-600s. I feel like it was that ethereal quality had kind of gone away, and also there was a good jump factor, and I was tapping my toes and jamming along with it, and really enjoying listening to it. And all that detail was there. Maybe not as much detail as you get with the LS50s, but plenty enough for it to have a really great sound. And getting that air around virtual instruments, but also real sampled instruments and voices. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, but I do think that this is a good recording to not forget about because it's really good music. So if you've never heard this before, you can still pick up the reissue of this from the early 2000s online, and I would definitely recommend it. And one other recording I listened to was the Buav Vista Social Club. So I feel like this kind of really well-recorded live music and this style of music sounds really good with a tube amp. If you like that sort of richness and warmth, and also that kind of holographic sound that you get from tubes, I think that works really well with this recording. And the Klipsch's work as well as any speaker I've heard paired with this amp. Actually, the best of any speaker I've ever tried. It just sounds really great. There's that feeling that you're sort of there. It's very holographic sounding, but there's density to the sound. It feels real. You get all the detail that you'd want from this detailed recording, and I think it just sounded really great, and I enjoyed listening to this. I haven't listened to this in a while, and yeah, this was a really good setup to enjoy this style of music. So I'd say in general, so I think that the RP600s work really well with a solid state setup. I think if you're considering them for that kind of a stereo, that can work really well. It really just kind of comes down to what your sound preferences are. For me, I don't have a clear preference between the LS50s and the RP600s with the solid state system. I like them both for different reasons, and I like one better with certain recordings, the other with other recordings, but I don't really prefer one over the other in that setup. But with the tube amp, I really do prefer the Klipsch speakers. I think that they fit really well. Again, if you like what a tube amp can give you in terms of sound, the holographic sound, the tube richness and warmth, and you listen to recordings that can benefit from that, I think that these speakers play very well with that. And the speakers and the amplifier are very good at revealing the air around instruments as well, and so they work together in tandem very, very smoothly in that regard, and so I would consider this to be a very successful setup. Now, if you're the kind of person that's just really about resolution, or you want something that's really neutral, then this might not be a setup that you would enjoy, but it absolutely is an audiophile listening experience and something that I'm going to be spending a lot of time with. So yeah, I think that's it for this time, guys, but thanks a lot for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next video.